My name is Holly Dean. At 32 years old, I'm a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force. But at my family's dinner table, my uniform was nothing more than a symbol of failure. My father, Raymond, raised his glass of red wine, a proud gleam in his eye as he looked at my younger sister, Isabella. To Bella, he said, his voice booming across the dining room. She's building an empire out there, in the real world. And you, Holly? Well, you're still playing soldier on the government's dime. His words were a jab, but the knockout punch came from Isabella. Smiling brightly, she added, "It just feels so good to be financially independent." I nearly choked. Financially independent? This was the same woman who, just 3 days earlier, was sobbing on the phone, begging me to wire more money because her American Express had been declined. They didn't know that a soldier's patience has its limits. And tonight, my mission expose the truth was officially underway. If you've ever been underestimated and had your efforts dismissed by the very people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story is for everyone who has decided it's time to reclaim their honor. The battlefield wasn't in some distant, sand-swept country. It was here, in my father's opulent home in Cherry Creek, Denver, laid out across a polished mahogany table set with sterling silver. The scent of herb-crusted lamb chops filled the air, but the atmosphere was thicker, more suffocating than any kitchen smoke. This was a familiar war zone, one where the weapons were words and the casualties were invisible. My father, Raymond, launched the first volley. He began his usual toast, a monologue disguised as a celebration, dedicated entirely to my sister, Isabella. "She's a rising star in the retail world," he declared, his voice rich with a pride he never directed at me. "Pulled herself up by her own bootstraps, a true competitor." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Unlike the military, which is a fine, safe way out for those who don't dare to compete." I said nothing. My training kicked in. I focused on a simple, physical task, cutting my lamb chop. My knife sliced through the meat with methodical precision, a habit from years of maintaining discipline under pressure. I controlled my breathing, a steady rhythm I'd learned to use when the world was spinning out of control. Inhale for 3, hold for 2, exhale for 4. But with every word my father spoke, another needle prick of pain broke through my defenses. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a prop in uniform brought in to complete the family portrait. Jocko Willink's mantra echoed in my head. Discipline equals freedom. I was using all the discipline I had just to keep my composure. But I had to wonder, where exactly was my freedom? Then came the assault from the flank. Isabella, radiant in a designer dress I knew for a fact cost $1,200, basked in the praise. She smiled demurely and began recounting the immense challenges of her job as a retail manager. She spoke of managing a large team and being accountable for multi-million-dollar sales targets. It was a masterclass in corporate buzzwords designed to sound impressive to a retired business consultant like my father. Then she delivered the killing blow, looking my father straight in the eye. "But it's all worth it. It just feels so good to be completely and totally financially independent." I heard the soft clink of my water glass against the plate as my hand trembled. Independent? The word screamed in my mind. The woman sitting across from me, playing the role of a self-made titan of industry, had used a direct transfer from my bank account to buy the very dress she was wearing. I looked into her eyes, past the expensive mascara and the practiced smile, and I saw nothing. A perfect, polished emptiness. It was a brand of betrayal so shameless it hurt more than my father's blunt disdain. His blindness was a tragedy. Her deception was a choice. Raymond, now fully warmed up, continued his performance. He launched into a comparison, his favorite rhetorical tool. "You see, your sister is fighting battles in the boardroom. That's the real world. You're tucked away somewhere safe, with the government making sure you have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day." He then brought up a new weapon, a story he'd clearly been saving. "Mark Jensen's son, from down the street, just made vice president at an investment bank on Wall Street. Bought himself a new BMW. That's success, daughter, not some pins on a uniform." His words weren't just an insult to me, they were an insult to every man and woman who wore a uniform. To make it worse, he dredged up the memory of Mr. Henderson, an old neighbor and a Vietnam veteran who had struggled his entire life after coming home. "Look at him, Holly," my father said, his voice laced with pity. "The military doesn't teach you how to get rich." I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot tide of fury. But beneath it, a cold, clear anger began to crystallize in my chest. It wasn't the explosive kind, but the patient, enduring rage of a soldier who knows the mission has changed. I could no longer just endure. I had to engage. The dinner finally ended. As we stood to leave, Isabella wrapped me in a brief, stiff hug. She leaned in and whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "Thanks for everything, sis." The two words were empty, a hollow echo of the gratitude she should have felt but never did. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I drove back to my small, functional apartment near Buckley Air Force Base, the contrast between my world and theirs, a chasm. His house was a monument to perceived success. My apartment was a testament to quiet, unseen work. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the driver's seat for a long time, the silence of the car a welcome relief. Finally, I went inside and sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. They landed on a small framed photo on my nightstand. It was me at 10 years old, in my green Girl Scout uniform, covered in merit badges. I was standing next to my father, who was beaming with pride in his own freshly pressed suit on the day he made partner at his firm. His arm was wrapped around my shoulders, his smile genuine and warm. It was the smile of a man who saw his daughter, not a disappointment. Where did that man go? The question hung in the silent room, heavy and unanswered. And why, I wondered, was I paying for my sister to play the part of a success, while I was being treated like the failure? Staring at that old photograph, at the ghost of a father's warm smile, I felt the present moment dissolve. The questions from tonight. Why? How did we get here? Pulled me back into the undertow of memory, back to the precise moment the foundation of my life began to crack. It was 2 years ago. A cold, relentless rain was hammering against my apartment window in Colorado Springs, the kind of night that feels heavy, like the sky itself is grieving. My phone rang, and Isabella's name flashed on the screen. I answered and was met not with a greeting, but with a raw, panicked sob. "Holly, I'm in so much trouble," she cried, her voice shredded with hysteria. She confessed everything in a torrent of shame and fear. She was drowning in credit card debt, weeks away from being evicted from her trendy Lodo apartment, and the bank was threatening to repossess her car. The life she had so carefully curated for my father and for her social media followers was a house of cards in a hurricane. "If Dad finds out, he'll kill me," she wailed. "He'll think I'm a failure." That was the word that did it. Failure. The one label my father used as his ultimate weapon. And in that moment, my instincts as an older sister and as a soldier trained never to leave a comrade behind took over. I agreed to help. But I wasn't a fool. I laid out clear terms, conditions of surrender. I would send her $4,000 a month, enough to cover her rent, her car payment, and her basic needs. It wasn't a blank check. It was a lifeline, designed to get her back on her feet. In return, she had to promise me she'd take a financial literacy course and start living within her means. She agreed instantly, her voice thick with tearful promises. Listening to that memory now, those promises sound like the punchline to a very cruel joke. That phone call wasn't a one-time rescue mission. It was the beginning of a silent, one-sided war of attrition, fought entirely on my end. I remember the following spring, my unit was planning a trip to Hawaii for a week of leave. Sun, surfing, a break from the relentless pace of military life. I had the money saved, the flight picked out. But then Isabella called, needing an emergency deposit for a business trip that would supposedly launch her career. I canceled my flight. I transferred the money. And I spent my week of leave working overtime, packing boxes for my side business. That business, Mountain Peak Essentials, was born out of necessity. It was my second front. After a full day on base, coordinating millions of dollars in logistics, I would come home and start my second shift. My small living room became a warehouse, stacked high with inventory. I'd work late into the night, fueled by black coffee, packing orders, answering customer emails, and negotiating with suppliers in Asia at 4 in the morning. Meanwhile, on Instagram, Isabella's life was a fantasy. A weekend ski trip to Aspen. A new designer handbag casually displayed on a table at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Every glossy, filtered photo was a knife twist, because I knew it was my sweat, my sacrificed vacations, my sleepless nights that were funding that illusion. The worst part was her silence. In all those family dinners, through every condescending remark my father made about my career, she never once spoke up. She never defended me. She just sat there, smiling. A silent accomplice to my public diminishment, all while cashing my checks. But the deepest scar, the one that still aches on cold nights, was carved on the day of my officer training school graduation at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, the culmination of months of grueling physical and mental challenges. I had mailed my father and Isabella plane tickets weeks in advance. I imagined them in the stands, watching me, finally seeing me for who I was. They never came. My father called me the morning of the ceremony. His voice was rushed, businesslike. "Holly, something's come up," he'd said. "Bella has a once-in-a-lifetime networking opportunity at a conference in Vegas. I have to be there to support her." The excuse was so plausible, so perfectly aligned with his priorities, that I almost believed it. I stood on that parade ground, the Alabama sun beating down on my new uniform, surrounded by the joyous cheers of thousands of other families. I watched as new lieutenants were embraced by their parents, their siblings, their partners. And I stood alone, an island of silence in a sea of celebration, feeling a hollowness so profound it almost brought me to my knees. A week later, the truth appeared on my Instagram feed. It was a photo of Isabella, grinning, holding a fan of cash next to a slot machine at the Bellagio. There was no conference. There was no networking event. There was only a lie, wrapped in selfishness, that had cost me the one moment I had truly wanted to share with them. The memory fades, leaving me back in the quiet darkness of my apartment. My mom's voice, a soft whisper from a memory even further back, comes to me. On one of her last good days, she had squeezed my hand and said, "You're the pillar of this family, my girl. Be strong." Her words, meant as a blessing, had become a curse, a command to bear any weight, no matter how crushing. But a pillar can't stand if its foundation is constantly being chipped away by disrespect and lies. I stand up, walk over to my desk, and flip open my laptop. The screen illuminates my face, chasing away the shadows. I log into my business account. The numbers glow in the dark room. Sales charts climbing steadily upward, profit and loss statements written in solid black ink. A map of the United States dotted with pins marking shipping destinations from coast to coast. This is my real world. The one I built with discipline, with intellect, with a grit they refuse to see. If you've ever felt like the designated strong one in your family, the one everyone leans on but no one bothers to support, please hit the like button for every silent sacrifice you've made. And in the comments, just type a simple, "I see you," because we all deserve to be seen. My mother called me a pillar. It's about time I showed them what this pillar is really made of. Success, the kind my father talked about, was a lightning strike. A Wall Street promotion, a gleaming new BMW appearing overnight. My success wasn't like that. It was a slow, grueling climb up a mountain in the dark, with no one to see the struggle. It was built in the silent hours between one life ending and another beginning. My days were governed by the rigorous clockwork of the military. From 600 to 1800, I was Technical Sergeant Dean, a logistics specialist at Buckley Air Force Base. My world was one of precision and consequence, coordinating multi-million-dollar shipments of critical assets. I moved with purpose, spoke with clarity, and managed my responsibilities with the unwavering focus the Air Force demanded. There was a clean simplicity to it, a mission, a plan, an execution. But when the sun dipped behind the Rockies and I drove off base, I shed one uniform only to step into another. The moment I unlocked the door to my apartment, I became CEO Holly. My small, sparsely furnished living space wasn't a place of rest. It was the headquarters, warehouse, and shipping department of Mountain Peak Essentials. Stacks of inventory boxes lined the walls, a silent army waiting for deployment. The air smelled of cardboard and packing tape. My evenings bled into nights, and nights into early mornings. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Dinner was often a protein bar, unwrapped and eaten with one hand while the other typed a response to a customer inquiry from the East Coast. At midnight, I'd be on my knees on the floor, packing orders with methodical speed, printing labels and arranging them for the next day's postal run. At 4 a.m., I'd be on a video call with a supplier in Asia, negotiating pricing on new materials, my mind sharp despite the bone-deep exhaustion. Every morning, no matter how little I'd slept, I would start my day with a simple ritual inspired by a speech from Admiral William H. McRaven. I made my bed. Perfectly. It was the first completed task of the day, a small victory that set the tone for the discipline required to win the larger war. The road was anything but smooth. It was paved with failures that felt catastrophic at the time. I'll never forget the shipment, my largest to date, that was held up in customs due to a paperwork error on the supplier's end. It was a nightmare. Thousands of dollars of my capital were frozen, and angry emails from customers started pouring in. For 3 straight nights, I didn't sleep at all. I personally called every single customer, apologizing, explaining the situation, and offering them a full refund or a discount on their next purchase. I remember the condescending tone of some of the mail suppliers I dealt with early on. They'd hear my voice, learn I was active duty military, and immediately dismiss me as a hobbyist playing business. But the military teaches you to adapt and overcome. Every setback became a lesson. I started applying the principles I used every day in my Air Force job to my own business. I implemented a just-in-time, or GIT, supply chain model to manage my inventory, minimizing waste and optimizing cash flow. When a problem arose, I didn't panic. I treated it like a mission brief. Assess the situation. Formulate a plan, execute, debrief, and learn. The condescension from others only hardened my resolve. I let my professionalism and my results speak for themselves. Failure wasn't an option, it was just data. But the most brutal battles were the ones fought in silence, inside my own car. One afternoon, I was parked outside the post office, having just dropped off a load of packages. I was eating a dry turkey sandwich on whole wheat, my lunch for the day. While I ate, I pulled up my banking app to check on a transfer. And there, on the screen, was the linked view of Isabella's credit card statement, the one I paid off every month. The list of charges made my throat tighten. A $500 dinner at a steakhouse in Cherry Creek, an $800 pair of Christian Louboutin heels. The same day those charges posted, I had received a text from my Air Force buddies. They were heading up to Vail for a weekend of skiing, and they had an extra spot for me. I wanted to go so badly it ached, to feel the crisp mountain air, the burn in my legs, the simple joy of being with friends. But I texted back a polite decline, saying I had to work. The truth was, every spare dollar I had was being funneled into reinvesting in my business, and into funding my sister's charade. I sat there in my car, looking at the half-eaten sandwich in my hand, and then at the 5-star lifestyle on my phone screen. I was living on the bare minimum, sacrificing my own small pleasures so that she could live a lie. No one knew, no one saw, and no one ever said thank you. That winter, the relentless pace caught up with me. I got sick, a nasty flu that left me shivering with fever and too weak to get out of bed. I lay there alone in my apartment, the silence broken only by my own coughing. No one brought me soup. No one checked in on me. Out of a morbid curiosity, I picked up my phone and scrolled through Instagram. There was a new post from Isabella. It was a picture of her wrapped in a plush white robe at a luxury spa, a serene smile on her face. The caption read, "A little self-care is so important for my mental health." The spa day was paid for with the money I'd sent her just last week. I closed my eyes, the bitter irony a poison in my system. Just as I was about to surrender to despair, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. The subject line read, "Inquiry from an admirer of Mountain Peak Essentials." It was from a man who ran one of the most popular outdoor adventure blogs in the country. He wrote that he had randomly bought one of my backpacks for a hiking trip in Utah and had been, in his words, absolutely blown away by the quality and design. He wanted to feature my company, my story, in a detailed review on his site. I read the email once, then twice, then a third time, letting the words sink in. A small, unfamiliar sensation started to form on my lips. A smile. It wasn't wide or joyous, but it was real. It was recognition. Not from family, not from someone who was supposed to care, but from a complete stranger who judged me solely on the merit of my work. It was a single, tiny light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. It was a sign that all the solitary sacrifices, all the unseen battles were about to be brought into the light. For years, I had operated under the assumption that I was completely alone in my fight. I had built walls around myself, not just for discipline, but for survival. I never expected the first crack in those walls to come from the one place I expected it least, my chain of command. Master Sergeant Mike Coleman, everyone just called him Cole, was my direct supervisor. He was a quintessential Texan, a man of few words, with a calm, steady presence that could command a room without him ever raising his voice. He never pried into personal matters. He ran our unit with a quiet efficiency that was both respected and a little feared. But he saw things. He never mentioned the dark circles under my eyes or the fact that I was often the last one to leave the base, but I knew he saw them. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal week of inspections, he called me into his office. I braced myself for another task, another late night. Instead, I found him holding a fresh cup of coffee and a warm croissant from the shop off base. He wordlessly placed them on the corner of his desk in front of me. "Looks like you could use this, Sergeant," he said, his voice a low rumble. That was it. No questions, no pity, just a simple act of kindness. In that small gesture, there was more genuine concern than I had received from my own family in years. I was so taken aback, all I could manage was a quiet, "Thank you, Master Sergeant." A few weeks later, the blogger's review of Mountain Peak Essentials went live. It was a glowing endorsement, and my sales surged overnight. I was thrilled, but also terrified. The sudden attention felt dangerous, like it might expose the secret life I was leading. My fear was realized in a way I never anticipated. Cole walked into my workspace the next morning, a familiar-looking backpack in his hand. My backpack. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first thought was that I was in trouble for running a business on the side, a violation of some obscure regulation I'd missed. I stood up, ready to explain, to defend myself. But he didn't look angry. He just looked analytical. He turned the backpack over in his hands, running his thumb over the reinforced stitching at the seams. He tested the zippers, inspected the waterproof fabric. Finally, he looked up at me, his gaze direct and professional. "Good quality, Dean. Very good," he nodded slowly. "You applied military standards to your product." The praise was so concise, so technical, that it bypassed all my defenses and hit me right in the core. It wasn't the empty flattery my father gave Isabella. It was a professional assessment from someone whose opinion I respected. For the first time, someone in a position of authority saw my business not as a silly hobby, but as a serious, well-executed operation. He saw the excellence I strove for, the same value we were taught to uphold in the Air Force, excellence in all we do. The real test, however, came as the holidays approached. Thanksgiving was a lonely time on a military base for those who couldn't go home. My father called, but it was a brief, perfunctory conversation to inform me that he and Isabella were flying to Cancun for the week. There was no invitation, not even a hint of one. I had already resigned myself to spending the holiday working, processing the new influx of orders. Just as I was sinking into that familiar feeling of exclusion, Cole appeared at my desk. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "My wife, Maria, is deep frying a turkey, Southern style this year," he said, his Texas drawl more pronounced than usual. "It's a whole production, and you ain't allowed to say no." That evening, I found myself stepping into a world I'd only ever seen in movies. The Coleman house was warm and loud, filled with the smells of roasting turkey and pecan pie, and overflowing with the easy laughter of a family that genuinely enjoyed each other. His kids, a teenage son and daughter, greeted me with enthusiastic hugs. His wife, Maria, a woman with a smile that could melt a Colorado winter, immediately handed me a glass of sweet tea and pulled me into the kitchen. They didn't ask me about my rank. They didn't ask about my salary. They asked about me. They asked about my travels, about the funniest thing that ever happened to me on base, about my dreams for my business. I sat at their crowded table, passed mashed potatoes, and actually laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. At one point, Maria asked casually about my family. I gave a vague, non-committal answer about them being out of town. A flicker of sadness must have crossed my face because I saw her exchange a quick, knowing glance with her husband. They didn't push. They just seamlessly changed the subject. I watched the easy way Cole teased his son, the way his daughter leaned her head on his shoulder, and I felt a pang of longing for a warmth I had craved my entire life. As I was leaving, full of more good food and genuine affection than I'd had in a decade, Maria pulled me into a tight embrace. "You are one strong young woman," she whispered, her voice full of a maternal warmth that made my eyes burn. "Anytime you need a place to land, our door is always open. You hear me?" I managed to nod, my throat too tight to speak. I got into my car and just sat in their driveway for a moment, the sound of their family's laughter still echoing from the house. And then, for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. I had been so focused on the family I was born into, the one that was supposed to love me, that I had failed to see the one I could build. A family forged not by blood, but by choice. A family built on a foundation of respect, understanding, and simple, honest kindness. The warmth of that realization spread through my chest, a shield against the cold. It was a new kind of strength, a reserve of energy I didn't know I had. And as it turned out, I was going to need every ounce of it for the storm that was about to break. The warmth from Thanksgiving at the Colemans' house had lingered within me for days, a low, steady flame warding off the encroaching cold of my reality. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace, a belief that I could build a life defined by my chosen family, not the one that had consistently failed me. That peace, I was about to learn, was fragile. I was in my makeshift warehouse, my living room, doing a late-night inventory check when my phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It was my father, calling from Mexico. I could hear the faint sound of mariachi music in the background. His voice was unnaturally cheerful, laced with the forced joviality he used when he wanted something. "Holly, sweetheart, it's paradise down here. You should be with us." The invitation was so hollow it barely registered. It was the conversational equivalent of a Trojan horse, and I knew what was hidden inside. After a few minutes of superficial pleasantries about the weather and the resort, he got to the point. His voice shifted, taking on the conspiratorial tone of a man about to reveal a secret to immense wealth. "Your sister has stumbled upon a golden opportunity," he began. "A premium retail space just opened up in Cherry Creek North. The foot traffic is incredible. This is it, Holly. This is the breakthrough she needs to take her career to the next level." I remained silent, listening to the rehearsed excitement in his voice. My own heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, like a warning drum. I knew the script. I knew my line was coming. "Now, the only catch," he continued, his tone becoming more serious, "is that we need to put down a significant security deposit to lock it in, about $50,000, and we need it immediately." He said the number as casually as if he were asking for $50 for gas. I was thinking, you could help us out with that. After all, with your steady job, you must have a decent amount in savings. The air in my lungs turned to ice. $50,000. It was nearly the entire sum I had painstakingly saved to expand my own business, to finally move my inventory out of my living room and into a proper warehouse. He didn't ask. He assumed. He didn't frame it as a favor, he presented it as my duty. Then came the part that made my stomach clench. And you know, with your military record, your credit is pristine. It would be much easier for you to secure a small business loan in your name for Bella's project. Think of it, Holly. This is your chance to truly contribute to the family's success. A memory from a training session years ago flashed in my mind. A class on psychological operations, or ECYOP. We learned to identify tactics of manipulation, distortion of reality, appeals to emotion, guilt tripping. My own father was using a textbook strategy against me. I hesitated, trying to find the right words, but my silence was all the opening Isabella needed. I heard a shuffle on the other end, and then her voice, syrupy and dramatic, filled my ear. Holly? Sis? This is my dream. My one big shot, she pleaded, her voice already cracking. If I get this store, I can finally be completely independent, and I won't have to bother you anymore. The fake tears started then, perfectly timed. I swear I'll pay you back every single penny with interest. Don't you trust me? Don't you want to see me happy? We're family, aren't we? We're family. The words were a weapon, coated in poison. In the background, I could hear the gentle rhythmic crash of ocean waves on a Mexican shore. The sound of their paradise was the sound of my personal hell. They were calling me from a vacation, relaxed and entitled, to demand the fruits of my labor, to ask me to sacrifice my future for her fantasy. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The memory of the Coleman's Thanksgiving table, the easy laughter, the genuine warmth, Maria's embrace, rose up in me like a shield. A real family doesn't put you in this position. A real family protects you. They don't use you as a financial tool. That clarity cut through all the noise, all the guilt, all the years of ingrained obligation. Let me think about it, I said. My voice was colder than I intended, devoid of any emotion. I hung up the phone before they could launch another volley. I didn't scream. I didn't pace the room. I didn't cry. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over me. It was the kind of focus that descends on a soldier in the moments before a battle, when all emotion is stripped away, leaving only the mission. I walked to my desk and sat down in front of my computer. The glow of the monitor was the only light in the room. I opened a new spreadsheet. Methodically, I went through my bank statements for the past 24 months, creating a line item for every single transfer I had made to Isabella. I typed in the numbers, watching the total at the bottom of the column grow. When I was finished, the final number stared back at me. $96,000. Next to the total, I typed a note in the adjacent cell. Non-performing investment. Risk, 100%. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of manipulation, of sacrifice, and of profound, systemic disrespect. Seeing it all laid out in stark black and white was liberating. The final drop had fallen into an already overflowing cup. I closed the spreadsheet. Then I opened a new Word document. At the top of the blank page, I typed 2 words, a title for the new mission I was about to undertake. It wasn't a plan of retreat. It was a plan of attack. The title was Operation Freedom. The time for silent endurance was over. The time for strategic engagement had just begun. The calm that had settled over me after that phone call wasn't peace. It was the eerie stillness of the air before a tornado touches down. I had created my spreadsheet. I had titled my document Operation Freedom. But a small, deeply conditioned part of me was still wrestling with the guilt, the lifetime of training to be the dutiful daughter, the responsible pillar. I was staring at the numbers on my screen when my phone vibrated on the desk. A new text message from my father. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked the screen. The message was short, but it was weighted with the entirety of my family's dysfunction. It read, "Don't be selfish, Holly. Sometimes you have to sacrifice for family. It's what your mother would have wanted." An arctic chill shot down my spine. He had done it. He had crossed the one line that should never be crossed. He had taken the purest thing I had, the memory of my mother, and twisted it into a tool of emotional blackmail. This was no longer about blindness or favoritism. This was a calculated, cruel act of manipulation. In that instant, every shred of guilt, every flicker of doubt within me was vaporized. All that remained was a cold, hard, and absolute clarity. The boundary had been breached. The war was on. My fingers moved with a speed and purpose that felt foreign to me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I hit the call button next to his name. He answered on the second ring, his voice oozing a confident satisfaction, assuming his last text had done the trick. "Holly, I knew you'd come around." "Dad," I cut him off. My voice was level, stripped of all emotion. It was the same tone I used on the firing range, calm, focused, precise. "My answer to the $50,000 request is no. Not now. Not ever." The line went silent. I could hear the distant, festive music from his resort, a bizarre soundtrack to the implosion of our family dynamic. "What did you say?" he finally stammered, the confidence gone from his voice. "And there's one more thing," I continued, my voice unwavering. "As of tomorrow morning, the $4,000 monthly allowance to Isabella is terminated, permanently." The explosion was immediate. It was as if I had pulled the pin on a grenade he'd been holding. "You selfish, ungrateful child," he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're ruining your sister's future," I let him yell. I listened to the accusations, the insults, the familiar script of my failures. I held the phone slightly away from my ear and waited, my own breathing steady. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my words like chips of ice. "The person ruining her future is Isabella, with your full endorsement. I have been funding this lie for 2 years. That is over. I will not participate in this theater anymore. I am a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force, Dad. I am not the family ATM." In the background, I could hear a new sound. Isabella starting to wail. Her weapon of choice. But for the first time, the sound had no effect on me. It was just noise. Before he could launch into another tirade, I delivered my final command. "And you will never, ever bring my mother into this again." I ended the call. The silence that filled my apartment was absolute. It was profound. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. The air filled my lungs completely, without the crushing weight of expectation and obligation that had been sitting on my chest for my entire adult life. It wasn't happiness, it was liberation. A quote from Brené Brown that I'd read once surfaced in my mind. "Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others." Tonight, I had finally chosen to love myself. If you have ever had a moment where you finally said, "Enough is enough," whether it was out loud or just a promise to yourself, hit that like button to stand in solidarity. And in the comments below, I want you to write a single word: freedom. Because that's what this moment is all about. I knew this wasn't the end. It was the declaration of war. They wouldn't let this go. There would be fallout, counterattacks, attempts to pull me back into the toxic orbit I had just escaped. But for the first time, I was ready for it. I was no longer a passive defender. I was going on the offensive. I picked up my phone again. My thumb scrolled through my contacts, past the names of my father and sister, and stopped on a name that represented integrity and strength. I pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring. "Coleman." "Master Sergeant Cole," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's Holly Dean. I'm sorry to bother you after hours, but I need some advice." I paused, took a breath, and committed to the new path I was on. "And I think I might need a lawyer." After that phone call, I didn't waste a single moment on anger. Anger was a luxury, an emotion. I was now operating on pure strategy. My objective was clear, and my training took over. In the military, we have a principle from Sun Tzu's The Art of War that's drilled into us. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. I knew my enemy's weaknesses, my father's arrogant pride, and Isabella's complete financial dependence, and I was finally beginning to understand my own strength, the undeniable, verifiable truth. The morning after my call with Cole, I met him at a small independent coffee shop just off base. The place smelled of roasted beans and quiet determination. I laid out the entire story for him, from the first desperate phone call from Isabella 2 years ago to the manipulative text message from my father last night. I left nothing out. Cole listened intently, his face an unreadable mask, but his eyes held a deep, unwavering understanding. He didn't interrupt, he just let me talk. When I finished, the story hanging in the air between us, he took a slow sip of his black coffee. He set the mug down with a soft click and looked me straight in the eye. "It's about time, Sergeant," was all he said. It wasn't advice, it wasn't a command, it was validation. And it was more powerful than 1,000 words of encouragement. He slid a business card across the table. "This is my brother-in-law, David Chen. One of the best family financial litigators in Denver. He owes me a favor." Meeting with David Chen was like shifting from emotional turmoil to tactical precision. His office was minimalist and modern, and he was a man who radiated sharp, decisive energy. I gave him the condensed version of the story. He listened, nodding, his focus absolute. "Emotions don't hold up in court, Sergeant Dean," he said when I was done. His tone was direct, not unkind. "We need data. Hard, indisputable data." Under his guidance, Operation Freedom moved into the intelligence gathering phase. I spent the next week transforming my apartment from a warehouse into a war room. I printed out 24 months of my bank statements, the paper stacking up on my dining table. With a yellow highlighter, I marked every single wire transfer to Isabella. The glowing yellow lines formed a river of my own sacrifice. Then, I went on the offensive. Using open source intelligence, or OSINT, skills I'd picked up in training, I began building a comprehensive file on my sister's life. I cross-referenced her extravagant Instagram posts, the designer clothes, the 5-star dinners, the weekend getaways, with the dates of my wire transfers. The correlation was perfect. It was a digital map of her deception, funded by my hard work. I pulled public real estate records to verify the average rent for her luxury apartment building, running the numbers and confirming it consumed nearly 70% of her declared salary. It was an unsustainable fantasy, and I now had the proof. While digging through old digital files for evidence, I stumbled upon something that stopped my breath. It was a forwarded email from my father to an old business associate, dated just after I'd enlisted. He was talking about his 2 daughters. About Isabella, he wrote with glowing pride. About me, he wrote one sentence that burned itself into my memory. "As for Holly, it's a shame. Such a waste of potential." The words confirmed the deepest, darkest fear I'd always held. That in his eyes, my service, my sacrifice, was nothing more than a failure to live up to his idea of success. The discovery didn't hurt me. It was too late for that. It simply fortified my resolve. He needed to face the truth of his own profound misjudgment. But my most powerful weapon, my ultimate ace in the hole, was the very thing they had dismissed: my little hobby. On David's advice, I hired an independent accounting firm to conduct a full, certified audit of Mountain Peak Essentials. A week later, they delivered a professionally bound report. It was beautiful. The cold, hard numbers told a story that no one could deny. Total revenue for the last fiscal year, over $750,000. Net profit, after taxes, just over $400,000. And a line item for federal and state taxes paid, a 5-figure sum that made a mockery of my father's claim that I was living on the government's dime. This report wasn't just proof of my success, it was a tactical bomb, primed and ready to detonate the entire false value system my father had built his world around. In our final meeting before the confrontation, David laid out the plan of attack. "We're not taking this to court unless we have to," he said, leaning forward. "Your objective is to reclaim your honor, not to destroy them. We're going to create a theater where the truth can speak for itself." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call my father and Isabella and invite them to dinner at a restaurant of my choosing, under the pretense of a final discussion about the money. I would orchestrate the entire evening. I would present the facts calmly, methodically, like a military briefing. No raised voices, no tears, just evidence. "Let the numbers do the talking for you," David advised, his eyes sharp. He stood up and shook my hand. "And watch." When their empire of lies crumbles, that will be your victory. I walked out of his office and into the bright Colorado sunlight. I felt no fear, no anxiety, just a profound, ice-cold sense of purpose. The intelligence was gathered, the assets were in place, the mission was a go. I was ready. The battlefield I chose was the Capitol Grill, a high-end steakhouse in downtown Denver. It was my father's turf, the place he took business partners to intimidate them with expensive wine and displays of power. Tonight, I was seizing his home field advantage. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a sharp, understated black blazer. I selected a quiet corner booth that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. When the maitre d' approached, I handed him my credit card. "My party is the Dean party," I said, my voice calm and firm. "I'll be taking care of the check tonight. Please direct all service to me." He nodded, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before retreating. The first move on the chessboard had been made. Raymond and Isabella arrived with an air of smug confidence, like generals arriving to accept a surrender. They believed this dinner was their final chance to wear me down, to make me see reason, their reason. My father immediately tried to take control, attempting to summon the sommelier. "We'll start with a bottle of the Camus," he announced, not even looking at the menu. "We'll be having water tonight, Dad," I interjected, my voice cutting through his authority. They both stared at me. "We need clear heads for this conversation." The power dynamic in the room shifted palpably. For the first time, I was in command. We ordered our food in a tense silence. The moment the waiter departed, I didn't waste time with small talk. I placed my tablet on the center of the table. Its screen was dark. "I wanted you both to see a few things," I said. My finger swiped across the screen, and it lit up with the first slide of my presentation. The title was simple, clinical. Financial Analysis, Isabella Dean, 2021-2023. Beneath it was a stark bar chart. A modest green column was labeled Annual Salary. Next to it, a towering, monstrous red column was labeled Annual Lifestyle Expenditures. Below the chart, a single, damning number was displayed in bold. Average monthly deficit, $4,000. Isabella's face went pale, the color draining from beneath her carefully applied makeup. "As you can see," I began, my voice as steady as if I were delivering a mission briefing, "Isabella's spending has consistently outpaced her income by approximately $4,000 a month for the past 2 years." I swiped to the next slide, a detailed breakdown of her spending, cross-referenced with my bank transfers. This deficit has been covered by a series of direct deposits from my account, totaling $96,000. My father squinted at the screen, his arrogance warring with a dawning confusion. He tried to brush it off. "These are just numbers, Holly. Your sister is doing great work. She's just a little weak when it comes to budgeting." "That's not weakness, Dad," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's systemic deception." He opened his mouth to argue, to defend his golden child, but I didn't give him the chance. It was time for the main event. It was time to deploy the bomb. I swiped to the final slide. The title was different this time. Audited Financial Statement, Mountain Peak Essentials, LLC, Fiscal Year 2022. I rotated the tablet to face my father directly. The numbers glowed on the screen, cold, hard, and undeniable. Gross revenue, $750, $130 net profit. After taxes, $4,790. My father stared at the screen. His mouth fell open. He physically recoiled in his seat, as if the light from the tablet was a physical force. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and leaned forward again, convinced he was misreading it. The numbers didn't change. The bravado, the condescension, the lifetime of dismissive pride, it all crumbled in that one silent moment. What is this?" he finally whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "This," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any triumph, "is my silly little hobby." The sentence hung in the air, and then absolute silence descended upon our table. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it had a physical weight. The only sound was the distant clatter of silverware from other diners living in a different world. Isabella finally broke. A choked sob escaped her lips, then another. These weren't her usual calculated, manipulative tears. These were the raw, gasping sobs of utter and complete exposure. My father leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of shock. He looked utterly poleaxed, like a man who had just discovered the sky was green and the ground was made of glass. He reached blindly for his wine glass, the one that had been filled with water, and his hand knocked against it. It tipped over, fell from the table, and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was sharp and violent, a gunshot in the serene atmosphere of the restaurant. Heads turned. A waiter hurried over. My father didn't even notice. He was staring at me, but he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at a stranger, a ghost who had been sitting at his table all these years, a person he had never once bothered to see, a person he had misjudged so profoundly, so catastrophically, that his entire worldview had just been invalidated. I didn't say another word. My mission was complete. The truth was on the table. I calmly picked up my glass of water, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let the crushing weight of that truth do the rest of the work. The detonation at the Capitol Grill was followed by a strange and deafening silence. In the days after, my phone, which had once been a source of constant, low-grade anxiety, went quiet. There were no pleading calls, no manipulative texts, no demands disguised as family emergencies. The silence was a relief, a vast open space where I could finally breathe. But it was also heavy, filled with the ghosts of what had been shattered. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, the kind a soldier feels after a long and brutal campaign. The victory I had so meticulously planned for didn't taste sweet. It was hollow, metallic. There was no triumphant parade, only the quiet, lonely task of surveying the wreckage. I had won the battle for my honor, but in doing so, I realized I was also mourning. I was mourning the loss, not of the family I had, but of the family I'd always wished for. The one that was supposed to be a safe harbor, not a minefield. A week into this new, quiet reality, my father called. His name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering, my guard immediately up. But the voice on the other end was one I had never heard before. The familiar boom of his arrogance was gone, replaced by a tired, frail uncertainty. "I haven't been sleeping, Holly," he confessed, his voice trembling slightly. "Those numbers, they just keep replaying in my head." He told me he'd spoken to some of his old colleagues in the business world, men whose opinions he valued. He had described my business, my revenue, my profit margins, without saying it was mine. They had all confirmed the same thing. It was a phenomenal success story. "I've been a fool, Holly," he said, the words sounding rusty and foreign on his tongue. "A proud, arrogant fool. I'm sorry. I was a terrible father to you." It was the apology I'd spent a lifetime waiting to hear, the words I'd fantasized about in my darkest moments of self-doubt. But when they finally came, they didn't bring the healing wave of relief I had expected. They just landed in the empty space inside me, a testament to how much damage had been done. An apology couldn't rebuild a house that had been allowed to rot from the inside out. "I accept your apology, Dad," I said, and I meant it. But I knew, and I think he knew, that it wasn't enough. Isabella, predictably, chose a different approach. A few days later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. Her handwriting, a looping dramatic cursive, covered the front. Inside was a multi-page, handwritten letter. It was a masterpiece of performative remorse. She wrote of her deep shame, her utter despair, her newfound clarity. She admitted to every lie, every manipulation. It was all there. But as I read on, her true nature bled through the ink. Tucked between paragraphs of self-flagellation was the real purpose of the letter. "I know I messed up, Holly," she wrote. "But I've learned my lesson now. I truly have. If you could just find it in your heart to help me with a small startup loan, I promise, this time will be different." I finished the letter, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the trash can. It was clear she wasn't sorry for what she did. She was only sorry she got caught. The pattern would never change. I sat in the quiet of my apartment and thought about the Serenity Prayer, a simple verse my mother had loved. "God, Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. For years, I had been trying to change them. I had been sacrificing myself on the altar of their approval, hoping they would one day see me. But I couldn't change them. My father's deeply ingrained prejudices, Isabella's pathological narcissism, those were things beyond my control. But I could change how I responded. I could change the terms of my own engagement. I knew what I had to do. It was time to draw the final, unambiguous line. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to my father. I need time and I need space. I will reach out when I'm ready. But our relationship, if it's going to exist, has to be rebuilt from the ground up on a foundation of truth and respect. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then, I opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over Isabella's entry. For a moment, a lifetime of memories, of two little girls playing in a backyard, of shared secrets and sisterly bonds, however frayed, flashed through my mind. I took a breath and pressed the button. Delete contact. A pop-up asked me to confirm. I did. She was gone. Finally, I scrolled to the entry for my father. The name on the screen read simply, Dad. It was a title, a role he had failed to live up to for so long. My fingers moved across the keyboard, deleting the 3 letters. I typed in his given name instead. Raymond. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of profound and necessary self-preservation. It was about defining my relationships based on what they were, not on what they were supposed to be. I was no longer bound by false obligations or titles that had lost their meaning. The storm had passed. The aftershocks had been weathered. Now it was time to build on solid ground. 6 months passed. The silence that had once been heavy with unspoken resentments transformed into a quiet, peaceful space for growth. The feature on that outdoor adventure blog had acted like a wildfire for Mountain Peak Essentials. Orders surged, and my business grew beyond anything I had imagined. The first thing I did was hire my first employee, another female Air Force veteran who was transitioning to civilian life. Together, we moved the entire inventory out of my living room and into a leased warehouse space. For the first time in years, my home was just a home, a place of rest. My life found a new rhythm, a balance between my duties as Sergeant Dean and my responsibilities as CEO Holly. The discipline was still there, but now it was complemented by a profound sense of peace. My relationship with Raymond began a slow, tentative process of rebuilding. We spoke on the phone once a week. We didn't talk about money, and we didn't rehash the past. We talked about his week, my work, the weather. He was learning how to listen. One day, a package arrived for me. Inside was one of my own backpacks. Tucked into the front pocket was a printed receipt showing he had purchased it online like any other customer. Later that day, a 5-star review appeared on my website under his name. It read, "An excellent product from an excellent woman. I'm proud of you, Dad." It was a small step, but it was on a foundation of truth. As for Isabella, I heard through the grapevine that she had moved in with a friend and was working 2 jobs to start paying off her debts. I felt no satisfaction, no schadenfreude, just a quiet acknowledgement of a natural consequence. Her reality had finally caught up with her fantasy. One afternoon, a letter arrived from an attorney's office. It was from the lawyer who managed my mother's estate. She had left me a small inheritance, a modest sum of money she had saved over the years. But tucked inside with the check was a handwritten letter from her, penned years before her passing. Her familiar, elegant script filled the page. "My dearest Holly," it began, "I have always known you are the strongest among us. I'm writing this to ask you to use that strength not just to endure, but to build something beautiful in this world. Create a legacy of kindness." Her words were a directive from beyond the grave, a final mission brief from the person who had always believed in me. I knew instantly what I had to do. I took her inheritance, combined it with a significant portion of my company's profits, and established a new foundation. I called it the Elizabeth Dean Grant for Women Veterans, a program designed to provide seed money and mentorship for female vets looking to start their own businesses. I was taking the pain of my past, and transforming it into a future for someone else. The launch event for the grant was held at a local community center in Denver. The room was filled with people. Master Sergeant Cole and his entire family were there, sitting right in the front row, beaming at me. And in the back, sitting alone in a corner, was Raymond. He wasn't holding court or commanding attention. He just sat quietly, watching me with an unmistakable look of pride in his eyes. When I stepped up to the podium to speak, I didn't talk about revenue charts or profit margins. I talked about my mother, Elizabeth. I spoke about the quiet strength of women who serve, both in and out of uniform. And I talked about the profound importance of having someone, just one person, who truly sees you and believes in your potential. After the ceremony, as people mingled, a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes approached me. She was the grant's very first recipient. She threw her arms around me in a spontaneous, heartfelt hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a second chance." In that moment, holding this stranger in my arms, I felt a wave of validation so powerful it eclipsed everything else. This was it. This was the recognition that mattered. It wasn't about proving my father wrong. It was about proving my mother right. The story ends here, but my journey doesn't. It ends with me, on a cool, clear morning, hiking a trail high in the Rocky Mountains. The air is thin and crisp, and the rising sun is painting the peaks in hues of gold and rose. I stand at a scenic overlook, looking down at the sleeping valley below and up at the vast, endless sky above. I have fought my war. I have navigated the aftershocks. I have found my peace. I am no longer a shadow, living in the space left by others. I am no longer the reluctant pillar, bearing a weight that was never mine to carry. I am simply Holly, a soldier, an entrepreneur, a daughter who finally learned that the brightest dawn is the one you make for yourself. I smile, a real smile, one that reaches my eyes and fills my soul with a quiet, unshakable joy. And then I turn and continue walking forward, up the sunlit path. That morning on the mountain wasn't just an ending, it was the beginning of everything else. I know my story is just one of thousands out there, each with its own battles and its own scars. Our journeys may be different, but the courage it takes to reclaim our narrative is a bond we all share. It's a reminder that our true worth is never determined by those who refuse to see us. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to be part of this community. A community that believes in turning scars into strength. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that they have the power to create their own dawn. Thank you for listening.